What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court for today, Monday, February 6th, 2023. I am your host, Sean Murphy, and today we got to talk about the NBA trade deadline because holy did things go down over the weekend. According to Shams Charania, first broken by the man himself from The Athletic, Kyrie Irving. Not only did he request to trade on Friday, but he was shipped out on Sunday, specifically being traded to the Dallas Mavericks in exchange for Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, a first-round pick, multiple second-round picks, in exchange for the All-Star guard. And for Brooklyn, this gives them some solid depth and some chips to play with as they're going to try to make more trades and make more moves happen before the deadline. And for the Mavericks, this is a push your chips into the middle of the table, try to make something crazy happen with Luka Doncic, get a worthy star next to him. And the worthy question with all of this chaos is, how does this affect the rest of the league? And specifically, what this channel cares about. You know what I'm wearing on my chest here. How does this affect the Detroit Pistons? Let's talk about that. First of all, does this trade change the approach from the side of the Pistons? No, because all reports suggest from the likes of James Edwards III, from Omari Sankofa, from everyone that's on the beat doing an amazing job, especially James of late over the last week's given a lot of great updates. Shout out to him. Specifically, some of the updates we have received is that Detroit is still in no position to rush to trade anybody. It sounds like if there is a most likely player to be traded at the deadline, it would be Saddiq Bey for the reasoning of his contract extension coming up and the fact that we have all these young players that Troy Weaver will have to make a decision on. And if you look at the value that you could get in return for Saddiq Bey, there is value there. Now, I personally would tell Troy, hey, there's a new media rights deal coming in a couple years. And even though these guys are going to get expensive and you're creating a problem for yourself because you're drafting too well, I know it's something we talk about a bit. I think that's like a good problem to have, and you just keep rolling with that dice until you can't possibly do it anymore. I think the fact that, we're in a position where we have pieces that people covet means that we have good players in our system. And I really do believe that Alec Burks, Bojan, and Saddiq can all contribute to the Pistons making some noise next season, especially with the lottery talent coming in after during this draft, the free agency period. I think there's a lot of potential here, but having said that, Bojan is definitely still on the market for teams to call about. I'm sure Troy's going to be taking calls about him down to the final buzzer. And I think the one thing that this trade really does impact the Pistons is in the sense that I think that now that the Mavericks got Kyrie, I think certain teams out west might be that much more desperate to make a move. I think specifically you look at teams like the Los Angeles Clippers and the Los Angeles Lakers, specifically, both teams were in the Kyrie Irving sweepstakes. Both teams desperately want to improve their franchises going into the playoffs. Both need a boost in, as far as on the offensive end, and Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks both are certainly that. It sounds like, reportedly, that the Pistons want to sign Alec Burks to an extension as well, which I'm just going to be straight up. Yes, please do that. Because when you look at the value of this guy's contract mixed with the quality of play that he's given on both ends of the court, Alec Burks is just a stud. It's hard to envision Alec Burks missing a shot in my head. You try, because I can't. It's humanly impossible. You try doing it, because I can't. But there was also another nugget that came out of all this conversation around the trade deadline. And it was a question that James posed at the end of his article, touching on what's going on with, specifically with the trade deadline. And he said, a Jerami Grant Detroit reunion and free agency? Don't rule it out. Now, we all know when Jerami left Detroit that there were no bad terms, no ill will. The franchise and Jerami were lock in step the entire time as far as the transparency of where, of what could happen with Jerami, and also transparent and where, Jerami could potentially select where he could go. But also, you look at how this season has gone for Portland. And despite the changes that they made to overhaul their roster and to potentially improve around Damian Lillard, it just hasn't made much of a difference. And Jerami Grant, on the other hand, has more than excelled in his role. In fact, he's having one of the best seasons of his career. And if Detroit was in a position where they could add Jerami Grant again and bring him in with Jalen Duren and everyone else on this roster, I don't think that's something to scoff at or to turn away from. And I know people like, well, why did you trade him then in the first place? Well, at the time, it was an asset that we could use to get more young talent. We did need to dip more into the draft. And with the opportunity to go get a guy like Jalen Duren, you don't pass up on those types of opportunities. But now, to have the prospect of having both of those players on your roster, I don't think that's necessarily something I would be opposed to. I think the team in particular to look out for at the trade deadline, though, as far as the Pistons goes, is the Lakers, because of the fact that they have those two unprotected picks that Troy Weaver said, if you're going to get Bojan Bogdanovic, it's going to cost an unprotected first-round pick and a good player at the very least. And the Lakers do have those things that they're willing to part with. And the Pistons could potentially be a part of a deal or a part of a move where they, in theory, do that type of move. However, all signs point to Detroit's not in a rush to make that move happen. So the only way that deal transpires before the ultimate deadline by the end of this week is if a team becomes desperate enough, calls Troy Weaver, if certain things keep going, because this deadline went from being one that was going to be very quiet to one that's going to be very active, because now you're going to see the Nets wanting to make more changes on top of what happened with Kyrie Irving. You're going to see the Lakers scrambling for plans B, C, D, E. You're going to see the Raptors wanting to get involved and potentially move some of their chips. OG Anunoby is very much still on the table. There's a lot that is looming over this trade deadline. And the fact that the Pistons hold so many of the chips, that is the exact position you want to be in. And whether they come out of that trade deadline with no changes, whether they just trade Nerlens Noel, whether they trade Bojan, Burks, and Bey, whatever they do, they're going to come out with value at the end of it. Because they have value on the roster right now. There would be value coming in return for whoever you would give up. And at the end of the day, it's a great problem to have as general manager. Ultimately, if I had to predict right now, like what I see happening at the trade deadline, I do think the Pistons will do something. However, I would have a hard time seeing the Pistons parting with any of Bojan, Burks, or Bey. In my opinion, with Saddiq Bey, I think there's too much respect and admiration there from the franchise for the work ethic that he has and the amount of work that he puts into his game. I think that Troy Weaver doesn't underestimate something like that, and I think especially for a franchise that's seen, players get traded away prematurely in their careers and eventually go off and blossom and figure it out somewhere else. Like, is Saddiq the guy you want to make the bet that, he's not going to be able to go make it click somewhere else? Because, I personally don't want Saddiq ending up in the hands of Boston or Brooklyn or anywhere in LA, because he would be a superstar's best friend. He really would be. And then Alec Burks and Bojan, I know we talk about Bojan's age all the time and everything like that and question, what that would look like next year. But both of those guys are just bona fide buckets. And if the Pistons are in a position to bring both of those guys back next year, that's a pretty good position to be in. And so as far as what's going to go down over these next few days, I would imagine Detroit is certainly going to be active in certain conversations. I would imagine with these big chips that are currently on the table that potentially multi-team trades and deals could potentially be discussed. And so with that, those could be areas where Detroit could be willing to step in. If they do, in theory, end up in those trades where they could get someone like a Karis LeVert in return, or say, like a Jakob Perl. Like, obviously, I don't think they're going for a guy like that, but, like a player who brings immediate value, but also someone that you could have in the long run as well. So I'm interested to see what the approach is going to be, especially after all these shenanigans of Kyrie Irving. I mean, good Lord, man. I mean, side note, speaking as a Pistons fan and looking at the defensive woes that we're seeing in Detroit, don't people realize it's going to be like 10 times worse in Dallas? Like, are you telling me a lineup with Christian Wood, Kyrie Irving, and Luka Doncic is going to be able to stop a nosebleed? Hell no. It's going to be terrible. I want to know what your thoughts were on that trade, but I also want to know what your thoughts were on the deadline as a whole so far. But also, be sure to go check out my brand new show, Mornings with the Murph, right down here in the description below as well, and subscribe to my new channel, Sean Murphy. But with that, folks, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you subscribe.